everyone, and welcome to Let's Heal with Beth Jones. That's me, your host. My mission is to bring the power of healing to trauma and abuse survivors. That's why every guest on this show will bring you an amazing story of healing in action. So come on, everyone, let's heal. Welcome to today's episode where I am going to be sharing my own story, and I am kicking off a short series dedicated in honor of Child Abuse Prevention Month, which runs throughout April of every year. Now, I don't always talk about my specific trauma and abuse because I'm all about healing, as you know, but this is an important topic, child abuse prevention. I really feel very passionate about. And so I've decided that I'm dedicating the series of shows in honor of the month because of my passion. So today I will tell you about my journey to heal my relationship with my grandfather who sexually abused me when I was a very young child. And I've written about this in Becoming an Empowered Survivor, which is my book. And so I'm going to read you my favorite chapter in the book. It's called Reframing the Hardest Parts. And then I've written 2 blog posts after the book was released. And these blog posts capture 2 more significant events that I had on my healing journey. It's a really cool story all together because all of the healing work that I've done with respect to my grandfather has been at the soul or the spirit level. And that's because he died many, many years ago. And he's not been alive, human form, to take part in my healing journey. So I'm excited to bring this to you. And now I'm just going to dive right in. Chapter 9 from Becoming an Empowered Survivor, Reframing the Hardest Parts. Many of my most serious and important relationships have taken me on a journey of trauma and unhealthy survivorship. Yet through my healing, I've evolved in how I see these people. I now recognize that the survivor in me is also in them. I can best demonstrate this transformation by describing my healing process in relation to my grandfather, my first abuser. Being a Jones meant I was born to a family with elders who commanded respect. Respect was a birthright, an obligation, not something earned. And this expectation remained no matter what the elder did. For example, I grew up automatically saying, "Yes, sir," and "No, ma'am," without hesitation. Those words were expected. Otherwise, I would suffer the consequences of a stern reprimand. Does it break your jaw to say, "No, sir"? This was uttered more than a few times in my life. None of my elders considered why I might withhold respect in a situation. Receiving respect was a particularly acute desire for my dad. He expected it to be displayed toward my mom and him. But my grandparents expected it even more so. Showing respect thus became a conditioned response, even when I didn't feel like it. I was never a rude, bratty kid. That wasn't me. Rather, I felt like my respect was misplaced, unearned, and undeserved. As the saying goes, you don't throw stones from inside glass houses. Or, said my way, you don't respect me, so why should I respect you? Although I didn't know it, that mantra must have lived inside me even in my childhood. Displaying love and affection for family members was also expected. Sometimes I gave hugs and kisses because I was expected to. This was more difficult for me than displaying respect for 2 reasons. First, I grew up living halfway around the world from my extended family, including my grandparents, and only saw them for a few weeks each year, usually in the summertime. We had snail mail and sometimes telephone calls, but my interaction with them was limited. We never had time to develop our relationship until after I graduated from high school and moved back to the United States. They were almost strangers to me when I moved back to Texas to go to college. The other reason I found it more difficult to display affection than respect is because respect can be shown mostly through words with no physical contact. Displaying love, or at least affection, requires physical contact. That always felt uncomfortable for me with my grandfather. For years, I thought it was because he was a large, towering man, gruff in his ways, and he scared me. Now, of course, I know my fear came from being abused by him. I feigned love and affection for my grandparents, often uncomfortably giving in to the pressure of their expectations. When I returned to Texas for college, I moved back by myself. I had extended family nearby. In fact, that's one reason why I ended up at this school, but my parents and sister remained in Indonesia. I had almost no experience being an American, let alone developing from a teenager into an adult in American ways, so I needed help. Although my Aunt Chito tried to teach me in the summers when I visited her, I hadn't yet learned basic living tasks for an emerging adult, like cooking or not overdrawing my bank account. Before college, I'd never had a bank account or any restrictions on spending. My parents believed, quite accurately, that I needed a little guardianship when I moved back. My grandparents served as my guardians, not legally, but that was their role when my parents weren't in the United States. When I left campus, I spent my weekends and holidays with my grandparents. They took care of me, ensuring I had what I needed, feeding me, helping me with my laundry, and allowing me to sleep when I needed. During this time, I discovered, or perhaps rediscovered, my grandfather's predatory eyes, which scared the hell out of me. Sometimes, when our eyes locked, the eyes staring back at me showed me that I was the prey. Like the classic wolf in the wild staring down the rabbit on a National Geographic wildlife show. The hair on my body stood on end when I saw those eyes. I forgot about his predatory eyes for many, many years, perhaps because they died with him in 1994. By then, I was in my mid-20s, a couple of years into my marriage and career, but all the unprocessed trauma associated with him and his eyes remained inside of me. The way I coped contributed to my wall. I didn't think about him after he died until I recalled being abused by him when my Aunt Chito told her truth some 10 years later. Ironically, I had no idea he was still stalking me, light prey, in my subconscious mind through my nightmares. Then, in the early stages of my trauma therapy, post-hypnotherapy, the memory of his eyes entered my conscious mind with a vengeance, bringing back my fear of him, along with my other emotions stemming from his abuse, was one of the first traumas I worked on processing with Monica. Those eyes, which I realized were seared in my memory, but pushed to the dark recesses of my mind, had to go. After intense EMDR therapy with Monica and facing those eyes head on, my mind finally released its fear. The image in my mind changed to something much less scary. Now, when I think about him, I see the toy googly eyes that sometimes appear on stuffed animals. In my mind, they're spinning around, all crazy-like, which amuses me. His eyes no longer have power over me. During the time I worked to heal from my fear of my grandfather, I was reading Pete Walker's book, Complex PTSD, Surviving to Thriving. I made note of certain behaviors I saw in myself, but I also noted other significant people with whom I struggled in relationships. My notes in the margins on these pages are profuse. Me, me, me. There's my mom. That might be my dad. Oh, look, there's Tristan. My grandfather is there too. I had to align his behavior with what I already knew to be a line of generational familial abuse on that side of my family. I considered that my grandfather abused others, including me, because he was abused or traumatized in some way himself. I wasn't giving him an excuse or forgiving him for what he did to me. Rather, I began to see him as a wounded human being suffering under the weight of his own life experiences, just like I was. Yes, he was the starting point for my trauma and abuse, but having processed many of my negative emotions associated with him by then, I was beginning to mirror for the first time. I was beginning to find grace for and acceptance of him so that I could let him go. My therapeutic work to process the trauma my grandfather inflicted on me took some time. Dealing with his eyes was the culmination of much hard work. But I did it despite my pain and fear. I healed my emotions and my negative I statements associated with him. As I mentioned, he died in 1994, long before I began the focused and intentional healing work. Had he been alive while I was going through this part of my healing journey, I honestly cannot say what I would have done with the relationship. Continuing as it was became impossible, given my release of his power over me. Whether I would have exiled him or continued our relationship with new boundaries, I cannot say. In the next section of this book, I will talk about my relationship with my parents and how that evolved over time, which is a beautiful story. Punchline, they are out of exile now, and we are in a healthier relationship with my boundaries intact. So who knows? Perhaps I would have come to a beautiful, healed place with my grandfather, too. The story involving my parents is beautiful, partly because they have done their own work to allow us to heal and move past barriers that we all needed to overcome. I don't know whether my grandfather could have done similar work, which would have required him to own his behavior. I think that would have been quite difficult when his behavior harmed another being. As ugly and destructive as his behavior has been on multiple generations of my family, owning it might have been impossible for him. My relationship was with a man who had died and couldn't participate in my healing work. That, to me, was a crucial, important lesson from my healing process. Knowing I can heal relationships with people who have hurt me without their participation, powerful. He could never apologize to me with words or through actions because he's gone. I don't need his apology anyway. I've been able to evolve my thinking about him, allowing me to let go of his actions' effect on me. He has little hold on me today. I'm not sure the hurt ever goes completely away, but I healed the relationship sufficiently so that it stopped constraining me from knowing love. Everything to this point, evolving my thinking about my grandfather, was enough to heal. But this is where things got really weird, as my thinking continued to evolve and still does. Recently, I read a book about forgiveness called Radical Forgiveness, a revolutionary 5-stage process to heal relationships, let go of anger and blame, and find peace in any situation. It's written by Colin Tipping. This title piqued my interest while researching books on forgiveness. I'll explain in my own words why the book has radical in its title, using what happened to me as I continued to evolve my thinking about my grandfather. I'm a longtime believer, as Tipping seems to be, in the idea that our souls travel through many lifetimes. In each lifetime, we're learning what we must and living our life's purpose, moving towards ultimate enlightenment, perhaps heaven, at the end of our final physical life. Some souls are part of our soul pack, and we travel with them throughout our lifetimes, each playing different roles as we travel. People we encounter each lifetime are at various places in their soul's journey toward enlightenment. Some are more evolved and enlightened than others. We have a purpose in each of our lives, regardless of whether we ever know it. Although it took me over 50 years to figure out mine, I think this is because I needed to experience certain events to help others heal. I had to suffer, live with my unhealthy survivorship, walk my healing journey, and experience hope, evolution, and love. Suffering because of my grandfather was part of fulfilling my life's purpose. Now, for the weird part. If I believe my soul is on a journey, which I do, then tipping asks me to accept something very, very radical. He asked me to believe my soul knew its purpose in this lifetime and willingly came into this life. Ergo, my soul chose for me to be abused and chose my grandfather as my first abuser. When my soul incarnated into my current physical form, we made a soul pact that he would be the one. Hold on, it gets weirder. Since this is what my soul chose, there's nothing to forgive. Now that is a wicked, radical belief. Radical forgiveness indeed. WTF? My mind scrambled the first, second, and third time I read what tipping asked me to consider. But I knew I was drawn to read his book because it was another step on my pathway to healing and helping others. If I could accept this about my grandfather, I could be completely free of him. I'm not suggesting you or anyone else must get to this place to heal a harmful relationship. Rather, I tell you this story to illustrate how far I've come in healing this most difficult relationship and in the evolution of my thinking. Also, I'm trying to find the good in my relationship with someone who hurt me so deeply and profoundly, and I'm seeking genuine gratitude for the relationship and what it taught me. All right, that again is chapter 9 from Becoming an Empowered Survivor. And now, as I mentioned, there are 2 blog posts on my website where this journey continues. The first one is from August 1st, and I'm not going to read the entire thing because there's a little bit of a recap of what I just read to you from the book. So I am going to pick up in this one with the next part of the story. Shortly after I completed writing Becoming an Empowered Survivor, which includes the longer story about reframing his predatory eyes to googly eyes, and my experience with radical forgiveness, I had another spiritual experience related to my grandfather. This time, I was doing Reiki energy work with a gifted woman led by her spiritual guides to help others like me. During the Reiki session, as my therapist worked over my body, my 5-year-old inner child came to my mind. I'm always happy when she comes to me because I've not known her for very long. In fact, for years, I was puzzled when I heard other people talk about the inner child because I had never met mine, so I had no idea what they were talking about. I met my inner child, or children in my case, at the end of my hypnotherapy session when I stepped back into my safe space just before coming back to conscious awareness. They were standing on the beach when my hypnotherapist told me to go there in an effort to calm me down from the terror I was experiencing. It was as if they were there to meet me for the first time and to help ease my terror. It was as if they were there to tell me everything would be okay, despite the hopelessness I felt as the hypnotherapy session ended. On that beach, I met me at 5 years old, ashamed and alone, and with her head tilted toward the ground. It took me some time as I healed, but today, most of the time, she stands with confidence. There was also me at 8 years old with a F you attitude and burdening the shoulder of protecting us. I love her protective nature, but she protected us by putting my feelings associated with hurtful and damaging events into boxes and pushing them into the wall I built around me. The wall was a fortress. It did a great job of protecting me, but was the cause of my inability to develop deep relationships with people. It prevented me from experiencing true love. This was a great coping mechanism until it wasn't. Eventually, my wall became a crushing burden of unhealthy survivorship. And then there was me at 17, fiercely independent. I see them clearly when they enter my mind, as if they were standing before me. Most of the time, it's all three of them. Occasionally, however, it's just one of them. It's as if she needs to tell me something she only knows. The 5-year-old me was the one in my Reiki session that day. She, or I, was walking through an open-air building leading to a playground. Children were everywhere, running and playing excitedly on swings and merry-go-rounds, and there were so many balls. Gleeful children tossed around lots and lots of beach balls. As I walked through, I saw a little boy sitting cross-legged, facing into a corner, his back to me and slumped at the shoulders. I was drawn to him, focusing only on him in that sea of the other children. As I approached, I knew he could feel my presence. Then he turned and looked at me. When our eyes met in my mind, my physical reaction as I lay on my therapist's table was to gasp for air, and my body jerked with great surprise. I was startled. Instantly, tears streamed down my cheeks because I knew who he was. I could not believe what I was seeing. His dark, tousled hair framed his eyes, which surprised me the most. His eyes were soft, innocent, and full of love. It was my grandfather when he was a 5-year-old boy. What? How? Why? I thought. I realized that he had known all along that I was behind him, and as I approached, his head hung in sorrow. I knew that was his silent, unspoken remorse for what was to come when he abused me. Remorse not only for what he did to me, but also because, with that single event, he knew that he would lock me away behind a wall of unhealthy survivorship that I would build for the next 45 years. And deep sorrow because we never had a chance to have a healthy grandparent-grandchild relationship. I was startled to see the love in his eyes and then his sorrow. I had never experienced either of those in reality, and I had never thought of him as anything other than the predator who I had known. Yet, I understood what was happening. His soul wanted me to see him for who he was before he, too, became a survivor and lived through the trauma and suffering that made him the man who I had experienced. I cried because I felt sadness for him and what his life had been. I had sadness for him, his pain, and all the pain he caused so many in our family. At the same time, I felt sad about the absence of joy in his life. I had compassion and empathy for him as a survivor, more profound than what I had ever felt before, because, for the first time, I saw him as a child before he was hurt, just like I had been before I was hurt. As the scene closed, our 5-year-old versions stood in harmony, their backs facing toward the real me. They stood shoulder to shoulder, close enough to touch one another, but not holding hands. They weren't ready to touch each other, but I felt harmony. And I knew that the message came from my spirit guides. They wanted me to see this, me and him in our 5-year-old versions standing together in harmony. The eyes are indeed the windows to our souls. All right, and continuing now with what has become phase 5 of what I call this epic saga to heal my relationship with my grandfather, who was my first abuser. Again, this is a blog post, October 14th, on my website. There is backstory that comes from the book and the blog that I just read to you, so I'm not going to repeat that, but I am going to dive right in with where this story picks up on the journey. In the most recent and fifth phase of my relationship with my grandfather, he came to me during a trauma therapy session and asked me for forgiveness. My therapist and I were working with the youngest of my inner children, my 5-year-old. In my mind, I was having a tea party as an adult with all three of my inner children at ages 5, 8, and 17. Just as we were beginning the tea party, my grandfather, the man I remember in reality, barged into my mind and asked me to forgive him in the same gruff manner that he would have had we'd been talking in person. "Forgive me," he demanded, as if I owed him that. I don't believe in forgiving the unforgivable. However, I do believe in letting go of the negative feelings we carry that bind our hearts and prevent us from knowing true love. Because of my work to heal this relationship, I had no fear of him. So I looked at him and said, firmly and with conviction, but calmly, "No." In Becoming an Empowered Survivor, I write about a hypnotherapy session that was my gateway to my healing pathway. During the session, the reality of having been sexually abused by my grandfather became my reality when I came back to conscious awareness. This event occurred between phases 1 and 2 of my relationship with him, as described above. Toward the end of the hypnotherapy session, in my subconscious awareness, I was in an epic battle to destroy a house with my grandfather trapped inside. It was also a battle to destroy my grandfather, but I was unsuccessful. As I fought the house, I put it inside a balloon that I tried unsuccessfully to pop. And despite trying other means of destroying the house, him inside, I was unsuccessful. When I told him no during my recent trauma therapy session, he replied, asking me in a gentler, exhausted tone of voice, almost pleading, "Can you let the balloon go?" He was referring to the balloon I had fought in the hypnotherapy session, with him inside, with our family karma inside. Our family karma is the generational familial abuse that my soul is here to break the curse of. I know this because of my self-discovery work to understand who I am and my life's true purpose. I am the wounded healer and curse breaker for my family. So when he asked me the question, I knew exactly what he was referring to. I said, yes, I can do that. Then I let go of the balloon and watched it float away. The following weekend, I was visiting friends in the Texas Hill Country. We spent a relaxing and enjoyable afternoon floating on the Guadalupe River. Dragonflies were everywhere and kept landing on me. Every time I go there, dragonflies are all around me. But I have now noticed that each time a different color has a heavier concentration than the other colors of dragonflies. The first time, that weekend, after I let the balloon go, the dragonflies were concentrated in white. If you follow my work, you may know the significance of dragonfly spirit in my life. It is no coincidence that dragonfly is the symbol of empowered survivors. As I always do when the universe has a message for me, I asked about the meaning of white dragonfly that day. I performed a Google search asking for the meaning and read the very first entry that was returned. Because I intend to receive the message intended for me, I know it will be in the first search hit. I accept what is written and don't go looking for alternate messages. This passage is extracted from the source I read that day. Seeing a white dragonfly could mean an ancestor who has passed on is trying to reach out to you. The purity of the color signals that the pain and suffering they endured are gone. It is also a reminder not to focus on the anguish and the suffering that surrounded their death, but on the love and happy memories that you shared with them. Of course, that was my message that day. I understood that as part of healing my family karma, by letting go of the balloon, I had freed my grandfather from his pain and suffering. Although I don't have any happy memories of him, I did see the love in his eyes as a child during that fourth phase Reiki session. And since that day, I have seen other signs. The anguish and suffering that he caused is leaving our family. All right, that's it for my story about reframing some of the hardest parts of my healing journey and how I have evolved in no longer allowing my grandfather, even his spirit, to have power over me. I hope you have enjoyed today's episode. I hope you have enjoyed today's episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at Beth Jones Healing Mentor. And if you'd like to know more about me and my work to help other survivors to heal, please visit me on the web at empoweredsurvivors.com.